Thank you, Chairman Patrick, Vice Chairman Carson, and members of the commission. I want to just jump right in because of all the comments we've had. Interesting, as Dr. Anderson was speaking, I thought he got my presentation and was actually looking at it. But I wanted to focus today on the two main areas where I believe public schools are failing American parents and their children and trampling on religious liberty. One of them is, rather than concentrating on what we used to call the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic, schools are now pushing these radical social agendas that often violate religious beliefs of parents. We'll talk about some of those similar to the Meads. But second, even though it has presented no real impediment to the practice of religion for the last decade and a half, the Establishment Clause still rears its ugly head that we have to cleanse all religion from public schools, which is so far from the truth. I think these are the two-headed monster, if you will. So just talking about a few instances of religious hostility. We heard from cute little Lydia this morning about her mask. What was interesting about it is her mask didn't say Jesus loves you, it said Jesus loves me on it. It was her own personal faith. And the fact that a 9-year-old has been brave enough and the courage to go to school with that mask on, regardless of what else she sees, and then go to her parents and say, look, I think this is wrong. They told me to take my mask off. I think there's something wrong with that. What was interesting about that case was there was no policy that prohibited a religious mask. There was no policy that prohibited words on the mask. When they looked up the policy, as her mom, she said she was curious. We've known them for years. Both are great parents. Looked up all the research, all the policies. There wasn't anything that addressed it. When he finally gave them a copy of the policy, he actually changed the policy right before he sent it to them to cover his own tracks. And the only reason was, we can't let this little girl go to school with a mask that says Jesus loves me. In this country, that's incredible. I mean, all the things that go on in public schools that you should be concerned about, that certainly isn't one of them. So it's one of these things where you see this reaction almost to anything religious in the public schools about the stories that we heard today. Another one real quickly is similar to the talent show story you heard this morning. We had a young gentleman, Brian Hickman, out of California. This kid was one of the most special kids you ever want to meet. He had cerebral palsy. He's been through more surgeries and physical struggles than almost all of us will in a lifetime. For an upcoming talent show, he wanted to perform to a Christian song called We Shine. He was excited. He was practicing at his church for weeks. He was ready to do it. When he went to the auditions, school officials told Brian's mother that the song was, quote unquote, too religious. And get this, it said Jesus too many times. I'm not really sure what the school thought the right number of Jesus was in that song, but apparently whatever it was too many. But the school there similarly didn't have a policy that banned religion. It didn't have a policy that said anything about the songs that could be chosen. If you looked at some of the lyrics for what the other kids were choosing, you would want them banned from school. They allowed those to happen. What the school said was the separation of church and state required it. And there have been Supreme Court cases for the last several decades that have taken care of that. That's no longer an issue in the schools, but we still have school administrators being taught by not only state school boards, by policies in the schools, by the unions. We still have this force that are teaching your average school official and teacher, which I think are good-hearted, to say, look, this is what the law is, and they don't know any better. So one of the areas I think we need to address is educating the teachers, educating school officials on what the actual separation of church and state is, which is not this ban on anything religious. It's basically the freedom of religion under the Constitution to allow robust exercise of religion regardless of your faith. And that's what needs to be taught to our officials. Interestingly, when Brian and his parents filed that lawsuit, we got a good resolution. He got to perform in the talent show on that Friday night, which was a couple of days away. So we were kind of scrambling to get something filed. The coolest thing was when Brian did his song, we didn't know what the community reaction was going to be. Brian got a standing ovation at the talent show. And the icing on top of the cake was we got that policy changed that protected more than 500,000 students who are now allowed to exercise their faith at events at public schools. So really neat for Brian and his family standing up. But one of the most chilling threats, I think, these days is what Jennifer talked about, and that is schools indoctrinating students in these current social issues, where school officials not only decide they know better than parents about how to raise their child, but the fact that, as Ryan mentioned, that they're hiding it from parents. It's just truly egregious. This is not an isolated occurrence. Chairman, in your state in Texas, we've got a situation in the Houston area school district where they did the same exact thing. They were socially transitioning our client's daughter, and they were lying to the parents about it for months and months over 2 school years. And whenever the parents raised it and said, look, we're taking care of it, please don't do this, don't call her by pronouns that are the wrong sex, they said no. Not only did they ignore it, but they said, we have a right under the law to do this to your children even without your permission, and that's in Texas. We have families in New York that are going through similar experiences. But one of the ones that's just as egregious is where public schools are passing these policies where they're forcing young girls to share restrooms, locker rooms, and even sleeping accommodations on school trips with boys. In Colorado, we have a family that we represent, the Wales family, that sent their daughter on a school trip here to D.C., which I think we've all done when we were kids. It was great coming here, seeing all the monuments and everything in Washington. They found out on the night she was about to go to sleep that they scheduled her to room with a boy with 2 other girls. And then her daughter was supposed to end up in the same bed as this boy, never telling the parents or the daughter that this was going to happen. And when the daughter found out, it was only because the young man told her. And they were like, no, it's fine. She could sleep in the other bed, even in the same hotel room where they're changing and dressing. And what was interesting, when we challenged this, the school district is still defending their policy and saying that they have a right to decide under their quote-unquote non-discrimination policies that they get to room these young men who identify as girls with the young women at these young ages. So these are the stories that I think are the most egregious. And this is not education. This is not what the schools are for. This is not the 3 R's that we talked about. This is indoctrination, it's coercion, it's deception. It's cloaked in an arrogance that these school officials think they know better than all the parents that we've heard from about how to raise their kids. And I think it's one of the most serious threats that we have today to parental rights and religious liberty. So how do we protect them? We talked about a couple things already. One, I would recommend passing the Federal Families' Rights and Responsibilities Act. There are several states have similar legislation, and it covers almost everything we've discussed today. It makes sure the schools disclose everything that they're doing, whether it's an opt-out, whether it's field trips, whether it's curriculum. It makes sure it respects the parents' rights in the public school. Almost every single lawsuit, the response by the school district is that parents don't have a right to control the curriculum. That's their response as their young daughter is supposed to sleep with a boy on a field trip. That's their response when they're teaching kindergarten students about how many different genders there are and it's fluid. Their response is you don't have any right to control the curriculum, and I think that's a major problem. We talked about, Ryan talked about school choice. Educational freedom is so important, not only for voucher programs, not only for release time education, but those parents who choose to stay in public schools, not to be vilified, not to be ostracized, not to be kicked out, but to have a voice and have a right to stay in that school so they could be salt and light to others. How many people are looking at these young boys and girls saying, wow, look at how courageous they are, I wish I could do that. But they're too afraid to take a stand. And last thing I would say is, we need to educate parents and students about what their rights are. In prepping for this, I read a study recently that said only about 1 in 3 Americans even know that religious freedom is in the First Amendment. How can you defend your rights when you don't know what they are? So I would recommend actually doing training both for parents and school officials on what actual First Amendment rights are so that freedom of religion for all religions is respected in our public schools. Thank you for your time today.